Hi, everybody. Welcome to Storytime for, what is it? Saturday, June 13th. It seems like half the summer's over. It's barely begun. Um, I remember I used to love the summer when I was in school because it meant no school and I could go do whatever I wanted to do. And I just, there's everything sort of blurs into one kind of long childhood experience, but I do remember creeks and water and extreme heat since I grew up in Georgia, and also the rain, um, which could happen at any time of day or night. Since we're a minute early, I'm going to start out with a reading from this book that I got from my friend Martine. It's called 50 Queers Who Changed the World. And today, the queer who changed the world is Alan Turing. I'm just going to read you what is in here, and then I will tell you a little bit about the controversy that was surrounding his death. Genius computer scientist Alan Turing saved the world. From the invention of modern computing and artificial intelligence to being instrumental to the Allies winning World War II, his legacy is overwhelming. Yet by the end of his life, this eccentric, creative, madcap man was hardly seen as a hero. In fact, quite the opposite. Turing shone from the start. At 13, he was packed off to boarding school and, finding the strict way of teaching uninspiring, proceeded to begin educating himself, starting with the work of Einstein's theory of relativity. At 17, he met with someone altogether more complicated. He fell in love with his classmate, Christopher Morcom. But when Christopher suddenly died, Turing was distraught. At King's College, which is in Cambridge, Turing's mathematical work was groundbreaking, and after 2 years at Princeton, he became a leading code breaker at Bletchley Park, the UK code and cipher school. His work focused on cracking the Enigma cipher machine used by enemy forces, which they thought was unbreakable. It turned out Alan Turing could break it. His work was hugely important. His research and other inventions that he made at that time were absolutely critical to the war effort. And his other works are considered the foundation of computer science. That's how important he was. And the Turing test is still used. It advanced AI by creating a multi-step test for determining whether something was human or AI. He also did mathematical biology work, and which informed later advances in DNA analysis. But despite his patriotic work, OBE, and life-changing inventions, Turing was a victim of the era's anti-gay legislation, which is why I'm reading you about him. Convicted of gross indecency in 1952, he was dealt with harshly. He worried that news of his sexuality would cast a shadow over his scientific discoveries. Fair enough in 1952. And accepted hormone treatment rather than a prison sentence, which is essentially chemical castration. In 1954, 2 years afterwards, he was found dead at home, the coroner recording a verdict of suicide. He was a queer hero of science, human progress, and the pursuit of truth. So about that verdict by the coroner, it was absolutely contested by Turing's mother and his nephew who's still alive today and still contests it for various reasons. He died of cyanide poisoning, and like a bunch of stuff did not add up. I'm not going to go into the details. That's for another day. But let's just say that I don't think there was ever any notion that he was killed by the authorities. I think it was either suicide or an accidental death. In any case, Alan Turing was only 41 years old when he died, a life cut short, really, by more than anything, homophobia, right? I'm going to put sorry, I can't apparently type and speak at the same time. So I'm just going to tell you I'm putting the Substack address to sign up for Substack in the chat. So you can go out there and sign up anytime. I'm going to read a few poems that I did not get to last week before I start reading super gay poems or super gay poems or super gay poems. There's no punctuation in Stephanie Burt's excellent title for her book, so we don't know exactly how super and gay modify poems or each other, but that's okay. She is an award-winning, I think award-winning, but she certainly holds a prestigious chair of poetry criticism in the English department of Harvard. And I'm looking forward to reading her stuff tonight. Here are a couple that we didn't read last week that we left out for time. This one is called Dear by Donika Kelly. And toward the end of this poem, there are two sections that I will basically read and then have a blank, but they are blanks that are enclosed by square brackets, and each of them is about 2 words long, so I just want you to know that there's a little piece of visual play with the language in this poem before I read it. Dear blank, I am not land or timber, nor are you ocean or celestial body, but rather we are the small animals we have always been. The land and the sea know each other at the threshold where they meet, as we know something of one another, having shown at different times some bit of flesh, some feeling. We call the showing knowing instead of practice. We seem to say at different times, a feeling comes. What is the metaphor for 2 animals sharing the same space? Marriage? We share a practice, you and I, a series of postures. Here is how I become a tree. And you? A body in space. And here's a poem by Audre Lorde, Black lesbian activist Audre Lorde. And this is one of, I don't know if this is an early poem of intersectionality, but it just shows, like being an activist, Black and lesbian had its intersectional issues. Who Said It Was Simple by Audre Lorde. There are so many roots to the tree of anger that sometimes the branches shatter before they bear. Sitting in Netics, the women rally before they march, discussing the problematic girls they hire to make them free. An almost white counterman passes a waiting brother to serve them first. And the ladies neither notice nor reject the slighter pleasures of their slavery. But I, who am bound by a mirror, as well as my bed, see causes in color as well as sex, and sit here wondering, which me will survive these liberations? Who Said It Was Simple? Audre Lorde. Nobody. And we know it's not simple. Here's another one from Audre Lorde called From the House of Yemanja. Yemanja. My mother had two faces and a frying pot where she cooked up her daughters into girls before she fixed our dinner. My mother had two faces and a broken pot where she hid out a perfect daughter who was not me. I am the sun and moon and forever hungry for her eyes. I bear two women upon my back, one dark and rich and hidden in the ivory hungers of the other mother, pale as a witch, yet steady and familiar, brings me bread and terror in my sleep. Her breasts are huge, exciting anchors in the midnight storm. All this has been before in my mother's bed. Time has no sense. I have no brothers, and my sisters are cruel. Mother, I need, mother, I need, mother, I need your blackness now as the August earth needs rain. I am the sun and moon and forever hungry, the sharpened edge where day and night shall meet and not be one. That is another powerful poem from the House of Yemanja by Audre Lorde. So here's super gay poems, right? So we're going to stay with super gay poems for a couple of weeks, and here's why. Because Stephanie Burt is a trans woman, and a trans woman who includes in this super gay poems anthology a bunch of work by trans people. And I think trans people need their own day. I mean, they are certainly part of the queer community, but I think they need their own day, not in court, but for story time. And so we're going to read poems by cisgendered men and women today, and a couple of long poems. And Stephanie Burt, as you might expect, being a critic, has a lot to say about each one of these poems, and I am not always going to read anything about what she says. This is a poem by Kai Miller, spelled Kei, and it's called The Broken, and then in parenthesis, the letter I, which kind of looks like the number 1. So it's either the broken I or the broken one. Again, like I said in my invitation, these poems are about encouraging ambiguities, right? Just like super gay poems. And it starts with a quote from Tanya Shirley. And the quote is, "Hi, I've noticed in your work the constant absence of an I." And here is that poem. 1. All that time I was writing about coffins filled with John Crow feathers, bells that chime 5 minutes past the hour, smoke and tall hats. I was hiding behind sleight of hand, behind birds and unruly clocks, metaphors that said nothing honestly. My sister, who is contemplating tattoos, asks how I choose my words. She says hers will be everlasting, the world being so full of the wretched who carry lost lovers on their asses, outdated mantras on their arms. How awful to be permanently tied to ruins. The only word worth sewing on your skin, she says, is your name, or perhaps God. 2. If I were to write honestly, I would write about fat, about close-fitting linen shirts that once hid the soft-backed breasts. I would write about the love of men and the fear of stones, which in my country is the same thing. I would write about the fear of inheriting sugar and the fear of lumps, lost teeth, and doctors. I would tell you how for months I stopped writing or opening doors because it was me on the other side wanting to be let in. 3. Tanya, on that island of podiums, I saw myself suddenly, big boned and asthmatic, and my important tongue went cold. I was avoiding my voice, full and divided like cupboards, the school I left, the way I gave up on God, the way I gave up on drums, which is the same thing. A voice full of all my names and full of the day he came to me in a space between tracks, silent, angelic. His name is not important here, but he is beside me and is a hymn. Tangent A. My life has been asphalt and gravel. Like all lives, though, I wanted it to be different. I wanted to wear shoes without a constant pebble in their bellies. But the dying bequeath us all their roads. Slipping from their beds into eternity, they tell us, walk good. My grandmother only worshipped in tents. She believed something was arrogant in stone and in cement, as if one could ever reach, as if life was not asphalt and gravel, 40 years of wilderness and circle, as if we should not be able to fold up our churches and take them on our backs. Tangent B. When the televangelist comes to Jamaica, Heroes Circle became one big tent, shivering with tambourines, swollen with sickness, as if hospices had been emptied of the not dead yet. In that awful congregation of yellow eyes, sunken faces, dirty bandages, and deep coughing, people were holding their faith bigger than mustard seeds. And a blind woman being pushed through on a gurney shouted, I believe, to ward off the darkness. When the televangelist left and all of the well went home singing, It is well, they packed up the sick like rags, and a man, blind to all the offense of his youth, told the blind woman he had pushed through. Faith, sister, you never had enough faith. Tangent C. I used to pray for hurricanes. I had never seen one, but could imagine how, in the wonderful non-meter of its rhythm, the freeness of its verse, houses could be picked up and turned into nothing. One June, a woman standing in the mud, confessed to news cameras that during the storm she lit candles in each corner of the house and prayed, and that's why she was spared. But while announcing her faith, a small pile of zinc and board sailed down the gully. She turned around to run, to chase her house, to chase her God. It's the same thing. 4. I am trying to tell you how I got here, why I would have thrown away faith if it was something we held like pens. But faith is interior as bone. It is the way I stand and the way I turn my head. It cannot be left out. The day I waved a red banner and tongues broke like water from its vase, it cannot be left out. The rhythm I once played on a djembe drum that made missing men dance home, finally, to their sad children. 5. Today, a frog with a padlock through its mouth leapt through a courtroom downtown, and every witness fled into the streets, their testimonies suddenly locked within their throats. Police refused to take the frog in for dissection to find inside the stories that it had swallowed. Tanya, I think of the poems I have written and the ones I haven't. I think of our country and all the unsaid things, this plague of frogs and padlocks rising around us. the Hope River turning into blood. I am piecing it all together now. Each line proceeds before I do. 6. Each line is another stone out of my throat. It cannot be left out. The day I kissed him, the years spent in the company of another heartbeat. I cannot love completely in this country. But he is a hem. On your favorite CD, the overwhelming moment is in the space between tracks, full of the last song's echo and full of what is to come. That is how he came to me. 7. He has broken every coffin and scattered the feathers. He has smashed every clock, and what I thought was wood and nails and varnish and velvet and our hands turned out to be silence. So I break. I break the rule. I break the ground we dance on. I break my mother's heart. I break the fast. It did not work. I break the chain lines end with me. I break the body, the bread, the words. I break the ceiling. I break the bone and the jaw and the habit of hiding. I break the stone. I break the curse. They are broken. I am written. Powerful, especially that last stanza. I break the stone, I break the curse, they are broken, I am written. We're not going to say anything about that, except for the fact that when I said he is a hymn, the way that was spelled in the poem was Hymn, not Him. And I realize it sounds very much the same. Here's a poem by Richard Howard called What the Future Has in Store for Rika Lesser. Dear Mrs. Masters, the 6th grade class of Park School herewith submits our research project for the year 2000. In choosing its theme, we have attempted to follow the guidelines Miss Husband furnishes, noting first of all our project's awesome date, which appears to be widely regarded as some sort of turning point in history. And second, Park School's office mandate that each project must show some relevance to life as it is actually lived on Earth, a statement not likely to please our class or any Park School class, even those less well endowed than our 6th graders in manners of vocabulary. Yet each 6th grade project that we consulted dealt exclusively with past achievements. So therefore, on account of this year being millennial, our own 6th grade class voted unanimously to concentrate on what the future may have in store for us, and how specifically for this class, our millennial hopes and promises will eventuate. What has inspired us most, as you're about to learn, if you read on, has been a field trip our entire class made only 2 weeks ago. We're still living it. To the reptile house of the Cleveland Zoo. But before we tell you whatever we learned there at the zoo about life as lived on Earth, you should know, you probably do already, it's a required course, that our 6th grade class has also taken this year what the office calls our hygiene concentration. Most of us prefer calling it by another name, whereby we venture to investigate those so-called human mysteries, which upon some investigations cease, said Mr. Lee, Park School's science spokesperson. Being mysteries and all. What a pity, rejoined Miss Husband, Park School's idealist, when we learned about sexual intercourse between men and women. Some class members claim they knew already. But according to Miss Husband, most people know different things about SU, yet what promotes fulfillment in sexual life, her actual words, is that everybody should know the same things. Well, for us, this has been what Miss Husband calls a challenging term. Because the whole class finds it hard to believe that grown up people voluntarily subject themselves to such senseless behavior, which Miss Husband says they must in order to produce children, and even hope to gain some form of pleasure by taking part in it. Some girls in our class, Lois Hexter and Lucy Wenzel, for instance, claim the film we were shown and the clinical vocabulary Miss Husband employed to describe what invariably goes on during SI made the whole thing seem rather disagreeable, to say the least, and sometimes really disgusting. All three Davids, Stackover, McConaughey, and Hammerstein, refused to believe that their parents, just to have them, did what we saw in the film. The Davids are sure they'd have heard their parents complain about that. Dear Mrs. Masters, perhaps now you can understand how, after the disturbing revelations of hygiene, our class responded not only with real enthusiasm, but also with something like hope to what amounts to an alternative view of a future free from the horrors of sexual intercourse. We gained this new vision on our field trip, as we were saying, to the reptile house of the Cleveland Zoo, which has an unusual collection of Komodo dragons there, the biggest lizards on Earth, 10 feet long. Dinosaurs, really. Solitary creatures that associate only for mating, which their keepers report is so grim to see that they now confine each dragon in a separate cage. Here's what happens according to eyewitness accounts. First, the male vomits to prepare himself. Then he flicks his long blue tongue at the female to judge receptivity. If she resists with her claws and teeth, he has to pin her to the ground during SI. With most livestock, it's called covering, to avoid getting hurt. The keepers told us that after SI, it takes a dragon mom 7 months to hatch her clutch of some 20 eggs, and after that, it takes 5 years for young dragons to reach maturity. Maturity means eating baby dragons, 10% of their diet, which have to become fast tree climbers to avoid predation, a zoo expression for not getting themselves devoured by dragon dads. We can see why zoos keep males apart from females, and therefore why it must have come as quite a surprise 2 years back for all involved when this one female went ahead and laid a clutch of fertile eggs that managed to hatch by a process called parthenogenesis, which means they don't need SI with the males. This also happens, one keeper informed us, with certain fish. Well, what we'd like to know is, could science obtain similar results in humans? If female dragons can avoid the discomforts and damages of SI by sheer willpower, that's what it looks like, can't something of the kind be achieved for us? Mrs. Masters, this is what our class project would like to propose as its conclusion, with the assistance of medical science, a vision of human life without SI, a new and improved version we conceived after contemplating the likely course of our grown-up lives in the years to come. These same Komodo dragons, as we can tell from the hatchling's evolved stratagem of climbing trees to escape their own parents' appetites, are a high enough form of life, higher than certain fish, to provide modern science a model for an ameliorated human existence. Dear Mrs. Masters, with the single exception of Anne Woby, who is Catholic and therefore insists, quite erroneously as it now turns out, that there has only been one incidence of parthenogenesis in our life as it is lived on Earth, the whole sixth grade class of Park School is proud to propose this report on the future happiness of human life. Perhaps one of us in this very class will be able to relieve humanity of the burden of sexual intercourse. That is our fond hope. Signed, yours faithfully, Judy Anders, Nancy Angrush, Duncan Chu, Arthur Inglehertz, David Hammerstein, Jane McCullough, Louis Hexter, Lucy Wenzel, David McConaughey, David Stackover, Joan Sturgis, Kenneth and Jonathan Klein, Michael Hopkinson. Oh, yeah. All right, we're going to do a short one. And then there are two that we will leave for another time. This one is by D.A. Powell, called Lessons in Woodworking. And I want you to listen to all of the, maybe not dozens, but many, many double entendres here. I'm in the clearing now. He is my master carpenter, and I, his joiner. We're putting up a front. We reckon it's the front of a house, and that we'll live herein. The raccoons haven't micturated yet upon the beams. The pallid bats have not deported us back to the hot garage. We've got our treehouse to erect. Pass me that piece there, he says, although he leans across to grab the block himself. And where his arm just skims the knot that is my shoulder, I come undone a moment, spilling tacks, and there's a hammer in my pocket. So uncomfortable, I have to pull it out and drop it in the grass. I will forget it there. It's going to rust. He'll take on more apprentices. I'll never learn to make a miter joint. For one thing, I'm just messy with the glue. And though I pound the damn things down, my boards come loose. My hinges stick. My only saving grace? I am discreet. This time I'll meet him by the twilit wood. I'll lift the rafters up. Just let him pound. So that is The Master Carpenter by D.A. Powell. We have one called Queer by Frank Biddart, and a really excellent one called Heart Condition by Jericho Brown, who I've read on Storytime before. But we're going to leave those because we want our full time to read from this. So this is a collection of poems and essays by younger people, mostly millennials, and here's the title, and I was fascinated by this title. It's called To Belong Here, a new generation of queer, trans, and two-spirit Appalachian writers. And so there is a lot, because West Virginia is the absolute center of Appalachia, as I think we might not agree on that, but that's what I'm calling it. This one is by Rae Garringer, called Proximity. I remember the bus windows, fogged up with the hot breath of too many bodies meeting the cold gray dawn outside. A thin line of lavender light above the easternmost ridge, switchback curves we knew without seeing, mountains rising naked toward winter's skies that hung heavy and close. Many mornings, Dawn would break as we turned off Lobelia Road and drove through the Droop Mountain Battlefield State Park. On the first of 3 buses, I rode all the way to Pocahontas County High School. The mountain laurels were thick and tangled in the woods, and the fog filling the valleys, hovering above every creek flowing down into the Greenbrier River, turned the mountain tops into islands. Sometimes the clouds come down to hold us here. There was a time when I also remembered the name of the boy who one morning amid my never-ending 2-hour bus ride said, "We should put all the faggots on an island and drop a bomb on them." He then spit tobacco juice into an empty Dr. Pepper bottle. That time has long since passed, but I do remember that he was a soft sweetheart of a boy, chubby and bearded already as a freshman, wearing a camo hat and work boots. I know that some reading this will think it impossible for him to be both deeply sweet and violently hateful. I know, too, that others will understand that contradiction, like change is a rare constant in this life. I do remember the name of the boy with black hair and glacier blue eyes who lived in a trailer on top of a long, narrow ridge a few miles from the farm where I was raised. I remember the whispers traveling up and down the aisle of the bus like a virus, that he'd hit it off at the bar with young skinheads from the National Alliance, a neo-Nazi compound up on the hill above Mill Point, West Virginia, an unincorporated town that our school bus also passed through twice each day. And after the whispers, I remember the White Power magazine that was passed up and down the aisle through the hands of every student on that bus. I remember that each of the Aryan race calendars, CDs, books, and clothing items shipped from our very own zip code. I remember my stomach tightening into a ball of stone. No one I'd ever met had been up that long gravel driveway to the neo-Nazi compound before. My memory of how it was explained to me was that the sheriff had said they'd never try anything around here, and that was that. Seemingly enough comfort for the 98% of the country that was white. I wanted to leave more than I had ever wanted anything. I did leave, first for college in Western Massachusetts, where I quickly discovered both that I was queer and that I was indeed raised in the South, and that Massachusetts is a very different place from my home. I only knew queer people my age who were from coastal cities or who were booking it to New York or the Bay as soon as we graduated. I remember friends, a couple at the time, both of them trans, describing their upcoming move from Northampton to San Francisco. "We aren't stopping once, not even to pee," one of them laughed. It wasn't explicitly stated, but I picked up on the fact that no sane queer person would move home to a place like West Virginia. Not if they had a choice. I ended up in Austin, Texas. I thought it was just a stop on my way to New Mexico, a state I'd always wanted to visit, but soon after we arrived in Texas, the car that belonged to my then partner broke down, and then we broke up after first getting a cat together, of course. And then I had no car or money or to move anywhere else, and so I stayed. I became a regular at a gay country bar where the cowboys in bedazzled hats and belts would waltz together, two-step, real slow. It was the first place I'd ever seen queerness and countryness in the same room, and it became my church for those years of aching homesickness. My friends from the bar would invite me over for Christmas, pick me up in their car since I only had an old rusty bike, and take me to the gay rodeo. When it rained there, I would freeze and listen to that familiar sound, so common at home, so absent in the oppressively sunny blue skies over Texas. 3. 3 years later, in April 2011, I moved back home and rented my neighbor's small house on land that borders the sheep farm where I was raised. The house was built in the early 1900s by the grandparents of another neighbor, now in her 70s, who was raised on the same farm I was, the farm my stepdad bought in the 1970s as part of the Back to the Land hippie migration. My neighbor told me stories about growing up there, about her grandfather and the day he died, the day he laid a corpse. She told me about which tree the Baltimore Orioles would roost in, that lightning-struck trunk is still there. Down the road a couple miles at the house where she raised her own family, her husband would be out in the field plowing with two giant muscled Percheron horses. I could see my stepdad's sheep out the window, hear them calling softly to each other across the pasture. There is nothing more comforting for me than the sights and sounds of a flock of sheep grazing nearby. I was 26 when I moved home from Texas that spring. It was then that I learned that during the late 1990s and early 2000s, the same period when I was in high school, the National Alliance in Mill Point, West Virginia, was one of the best organized and best financed white supremacist hate groups in the nation. I learned that William Pierce, founder of the group, had been born in Atlanta and college educated in Texas and Colorado, that he'd been active in the neo-Nazi networks across the United States, including in Oregon, Connecticut, and Washington, D.C., before founding the National Alliance in 1974, and later relocating the organization to West Virginia in 1985. I also learned that Pierce wrote multiple books, including the Turner Diaries, which inspired the Oklahoma City bombing, and Hunter, which was dedicated to and inspired by the life of a white supremacist serial killer named Joseph Paul Franklin, who murdered at least 22 young people across the United States in the late 1970s and early 1980s. The majority of those he killed were black. The white folks he killed were in interracial relationships. Joseph Paul Franklin also took responsibility for the murder of two young white women who had been hitchhiking to the Rainbow Gathering and whose bodies were dumped just off Lobelia Road, not 10 miles from my home, in 1980. It was later proven, as the community had whispered all along, that it was a good old local boy who was to blame for their deaths. But I'm interested in what led this white supremacist serial killer with deep ties to a national network of neo-Nazis to claim responsibility for the murder of these young hippie women whose bodies were left in the woods along Lobelia Road, a road I spent hours traveling daily by bus in middle and high school, and where many of my friends lived, and on which another infamous murder took place, which still haunts me to this day. 4. I'd heard about that other murder on Lobelia Road growing up, too. My 8th grade teacher loved to try and scare me in the afternoon as I waited for the bus, telling me, "My wife won't let me go up that road." I'd heard about a body wrapped in plastic and dumped in a cave, about another body found hanging in a tree. But it wasn't until moving home in my late 20s that I heard the rumor that these two white men, long dead, had possibly been lovers. It was speculation, small-town gossip. A childhood neighbor who has since died knew one of the men, Peter Hauer. When I asked if he thought the rumor about their queerness was true, he said, "I was at parties with Peter when he was real drunk, and I could see how he might have been gay." My stepdad, who also knew Peter, said, "I've never heard anything about that," and talked about Peter's girlfriend at the time. This is not a true crime essay. I'm not going to tell you what did or didn't happen, because the truth is I don't care. And I also don't know. I'm not interested in trying to prove or disprove the theories, even the theory that they may have been gay. I'm interested in what it means for young queer people to grow up in a place and time where any evidence of queerness having existed locally has been erased, where the only evidence of our historical presence bubbles up through rumors of murders. I'm interested in why this haunts me, eats away at me sometimes, and won't fade into the past like it seems to for so many others. I'm interested in what it means to grow up in proximity to so much violence, but largely to be protected from it. Their bodies were found in 1975, a decade before I was born. Peter Hauer hanging in a maple tree high up on a ridge over a mile away from his house. Walter Smith was found wrapped in plastic inside a cave just a couple hundred yards from Peter's house. He'd been shot multiple times in the head. Not even out of college yet, he was spending the summer in the county working at Watauga State Park. The official final verdict by county officials says it was a murder and then suicide by Peter. Some folks speculated that he was disturbed by his desire for the young man. I tried to imagine it, him disgusted with himself for his inability to resist this handsome man. I imagine it festering and growing within him until he killed the boy, wrapped his body in plastic and dumped it into the cave he'd loved so well. The caves are what brought Peter to West Virginia in the first place as part of the same back to the land hippie migration that brought my parents to the state too. I imagine him going home and typing out a suicide note and then later hanging himself high up in a tree on a wooded hillside, so far out it took them months to find his body. Walter was found in June 1975. Peter was still missing at that time. Neither the FBI nor a self-organized group of cavers could locate him for months. The remains of his body weren't found until late fall by a man and his young son who were out hunting for deer and saw his bones tied up in a tree. But there's nothing more universally rural than the reality of how stories spread and change. It's like a never-ending game of telephone. And I heard rumors in the county that some people think someone had them both killed, say there's no way Peter could have hung himself as high up in the tree as he was, that the rope was too short, the logistics impossible. Whispers that someone typed a fake suicide note to cover up a double homicide. 5. But what if they had been lovers? And what if they'd lived? Grown old together in that house by the cave with a garden full of mortgage lifter tomatoes and scarlet runner beans. Dahlias and yellow roses and rosemary and lavender, peonies and lettuce and onions, snapdragons and cosmos and carrots and arugula, bloody butcher corn and pie pumpkins and gladiolas. Walter would have made his own organic bug spray and spent hours out there combing each leaf of each plant, a spray here, a spray there, and Peter would have rolled his eyes and muttered about how inefficient it was, but then gently placed his palm at the back of Walter's neck. What if they'd made a little heaven together under the shade of that big oak tree next to the house, trained walls of vines and shrubs to hide their home from the rare passing car winding by? What if they dug up rocks to make a little patio one summer before their backs got too old for that much lifting? Peter already stiff and bossing Walter around, who would roll his eyes in return. I imagine they'd have put chairs and a little cafe table on it, candles to keep the bugs away and to see by. I picture them sitting there down next to the creek that grew fat and urgent in springtime floods, gurgling quietly in late summer and sometimes froze over in a long, cold January. The ice thick and strong enough to lay down on, to press your ear against, to hear the water still moving slowly deep underneath that frozen surface. And maybe, if you're lucky, even to see a fish, barely moving, looking up at you from under all that ice. They'd drink wine and eat meals from their garden there, have friends visit from the city in the summer. They'd dance together to their records turned up as loud as they'd go, sometimes slow and sexy, sometimes wild and far apart. I want for them to have grown old together, moving beyond the devouring lust and explosive fights of their youth, moving into a companionship so stable that watching them together was like watching my neighbor's team of workhorses at rest, who move in unison even when they aren't harnessed together by leather and metal, aware of each other's body as if it is their own. Why couldn't they have this too? Why couldn't they have this in a place like this, in this very place? And what would it have meant to grow up seeing them together at the small town festival or winning first prize for their prize tomato at the state fair? What would it have been like to ride the bus home, all those wasted hours of kids snorting pills and talking shit and starting fights, if near the end of the ride I had passed by their house, wiped the condensation off the window, and waved to them as we drove by? Would they have seen my queerness before I did? Or would I have found my own sooner if I'd grown up in a community that could have held them gently? Could I have gone to dinner with them in high school, a break from walking on eggshells in my own home? I imagine their house would have smelled like soup on the stove, and the last of the year's roses drying in a blue bell jar on the table. I wonder if it would have been full of art, colorful and cozy, or if it would have been sparsely decorated with photos cut out of the New Yorker and Sun magazine and the Pocahontas Times, too, stuck to the walls with pushpins, crooked and with no thought for aesthetic spacing. Could I have spent nights at their house having dance parties on a Friday evening and helping them to hang up garlic to dry in the barn on Saturday mornings as I did with the other neighbors? 6. The answer, of course, is no. Straight people didn't let their kids stay the night with gay men in the 80s or the 90s or the 2000s even. Most probably wouldn't still. And why am I even dreaming up this life of contentment for two men who I never met, two men who died before I was born, two men who might very well have been straight? Why am I fixated on wishing they'd had this experience of growing old together in a house they'd turned into a home on a little flat piece of land between Bruffy's Creek and Lobelia Road in Pocahontas County, West Virginia? Don't make it a hate crime when you don't even know if they were gay, my stepdad told me in response to my description of the early and chaotic musings of this essay. He has a point. This fantasy isn't even about Peter and Walter. It's about my own famished longing to rewrite the past, to imagine a reality in which rural queer elders could have thrived in this place. In the summer of 2005, I was home from college and I was in love for the first time. It was that all-consuming, naive kind. I hadn't yet had my heart broken, so I loved unbridled by fear and let it fill me with all those heights and depths of emotion, all the joy of welcoming in a newfound queerness. I had buzzed my hair down short and close to my head. I wore a giant ring in my septum, baggy black cargo pants, a big T-shirt and a camo hat. I'd go into the gas station and folks would call me sir and then ma'am when they heard my voice. They still do that, and I smile at their confusion, but never clarify. I was home for the summer doing an internship at the girls' camp I'd gone to through all high school. I spent hours late in the night in the office building, laying on the wood floor, holding the landline phone up to my ear, minutes ticking away on the long-distance card, listening to the stories my then-partner told me. He was in San Francisco for the summer, working at a queer and trans organization, going to Pride in the Bay, making out with strangers on the street. I was being told by adults who I had found haven with in the high school, that I couldn't be open about my queerness with the campers, that I couldn't offer support to the first out queer 13-year-old who came to the camp that year because maybe it was just a phase. How can they really know? I still know that former 13-year-old. He's in his 30s now. It wasn't a phase. He is a sweet heart of a trans man, great dad, good friend. That summer, as part of my internship, the organization held a cakewalk as a fundraiser at the tiny nearby town's annual festival. Someone had mentioned that the new head of the National Alliance had gone into the cafeteria where the community meal was taking place. That year, the year before I left for college, William Pierce had died, and a new, tensely fluctuating pair of younger leaders had taken over. The Nazis had never come around town events when I was growing up, not that I knew of. They kept to themselves up on the hillside for the most part. I didn't know what he looked like, but I remember standing in the sun in the grass between the main brick school building and the cafeteria. I remember holding the broomstick and laughing. I saw a young white man, tall, thin, fit, walking down the sidewalk with a boringly pretty blonde woman at his side. We locked eyes. I saw him look me up and down, my black cargo shorts, my buzzed hair, his expression open and curious, the beginnings of a smile. And then, at the same instant that I realized who he was, he realized that I was not a young skinhead, but instead a young faggot playing with gender. It feels ridiculous to tell you about his glare. Knowing now what he was capable of what they were capable of. Knowing that my whiteness and my middle-class upbringing protect me from physical violence so often, but I had never seen someone's face change so quickly to such a deeply hateful glare. It was almost like his eyes changed from opening and questioning to the chambers of a gun that he wanted me to know well was aimed straight at my forehead. That he saw me for what I was, for what I am. I can still feel that look in my body. I know there are many who have never experienced that kind of a look, and many more who know it well. And are not protected by whiteness from what often follows that glare. The next year, his co-leader was indicted on federal civil charges for organizing and participating in brutal attacks against Latinx and indigenous men at a bar in Salt Lake City. And so, in the end, the sheriff was right. They'd never try anything around here. There are several more sections, but I'm just going to read this last one before we go. Or it's section 8. I didn't want to write this essay. Lord knows we don't need more stories about violence, white supremacy, and toxic masculinity in Appalachia. I've seen, heard, and felt firsthand the disdain of so much of this United States holds for places like this. There are many people outside this region who only want to hear the story about this place, this tragedy, this racism, this violence, this homophobia. I've spent years working in radio documenting rural queer histories, trying to prove to myself and to others that we have always been here, to remind myself that there are long legacies of radical cross-race organizing in these mountains, that this place is not only what national media thinks it is, but it feels like no amount of defending or reframing is enough to shift national ideas about Appalachia. And talking about this violence, these secrets, this hate, feels almost like a betrayal of this place that I love so much. Writing it feels like conceding, like switching teams. But the truth is that my community, just like every community, deserves to be understood with nuance, with complexity, with the knowledge that Only many contradictory truths taken together make a whole. Each one of us, each one of our homes deserves at the very least this. I refuse to let this place be flattened, ironed out into some monolithic hellhole that serves its role as a scapegoat for the rest of the nation. And yet, this too is a part of the place I call home. And not talking about these horrific truths is a way of protecting them, condoning them even, the complacency of silence, which I also refuse. 9. How do you live like this, with this deep rage and deep love for seemingly opposing forces and spaces? With this tangled pile of limbs and multiple worlds, women of color have written this best. Gloria Anzaldúa, Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks, Toni Morrison, Jesmyn Ward, Louise Endrich. I have tried to leave, but it feels like my bones and these mountains are separate pieces of the same puzzle. Even as I know that my love of this place was made possible by the attempted genocide and forced removal of thousands of indigenous people. Sometimes when I swim in these stories, I don't know why I love West Virginia more than anything else I've ever loved. After all of this, why do I allow this place to hold on to me when it's never told me or my kind that we are wanted, that we are worthy, that we are loved? 10. I left again. Not because I wanted to, but because the resources I needed at the time didn't exist here. First for graduate school in North Carolina, then several years making community radio in the coal fields of eastern Kentucky. But eventually I moved back home to West Virginia again, not to Pocahontas County, but close, a few counties away. A place with strong ties and happy childhood memories, a place like home, but with just enough space to breathe, to look back with some distance and perspective. I now live in the little trailer of my dreams, surrounded by animals under the wise and steady watch of a mountain I love more every day. I can hear the train whistles coming up the river's edge, mostly coal trains, sometimes Amtrak. And most mornings I can see the fog hugging the river's surface down in the valley. Some days I'm convinced I will never get laid again, and sometimes I wonder my obsession with imagining a happy, long, stable love for two men who were probably straight, who died a decade before I was born, is only born of selfishness. Because still today I'm uncertain if I can have this kind of life, this kind of love in this kind of place. After years of gathering rural queer histories across the continent for country queers, I still feel like I have to invite them for myself in the place I call home. Maybe writing queer history into existence in a place where it is all but eradicated is my attempt at reclaiming my home for my own and our collective queer futures. But most days, I'm okay with that if it means I get to be here in these mountains. It's the only place I've ever truly been able to rest. In Dorothy Allison's memoir, she writes about how it's possible to both love and hate the things we aren't sure we understand. I don't know how to wrangle this essay into a neatly flowing whole, these layers and tangles of violence across time and space, this undying, aching love for this place. But maybe that's just it. That hate and love aren't actually binaries in opposition to one another. That old familiar lie that keeps trapping us in bodies, patterns, and stories that limit possibility, but instead, they too exist on a continuum, a spectrum with millions of points along the way and beyond. And just like with gender, just like desire, just like rage or sadness or euphoria, we never exist at only one point on that continuum for long. We're constantly changing and shifting, rarely understanding the things that truly matter in this life until long after they're gone. And this tangle of stories, this dense briar bramble I can't find a neat way through, I have to write it because I want these community ghosts that haunt us to be released. I want them to be free, to finally rest. I want for those of us still living to be able to rest. I want for us to believe that we can create a radically different future here. And I want us to get to work on building it together. joyfully, lovingly, queerly. I want our communities to heal so we can hold and see one another with more grace, so that we can all have a little more room to breathe. And I did get through the whole thing. I just kept reading because I knew that we were only going to be a couple of minutes late. Thanks for coming to Storytime for Saturday, January 13th, 2026.